Hey guys, today I'm going to be talking about how to increase your word count. So here's a bit of a confession, I'm an underwriter. My first drafts pretty much resemble orange concentrate. They're sugary, strong, and when sculled they'll make your eyes water. However, the second draft, my rewrite, is all water. This draft is all about threading in multiple viewpoints, subplots, descriptions, and sensory details, all of which increase the word count. To keep things in perspective, long books are not necessarily good books. In fact, many beloved classics are skinny minis. The Great Gatsby, Frankenstein, The Stranger, The Metamorphosis, and Slaughterhouse-Five, so it goes, are all lean, mean, fighting machines. So don't get hung up on the word count. If you watch this video and none of these suggestions seem relevant to your manuscript, then that's fine. Maybe your story is the right length for that story. You should know that most of these suggestions are geared towards genre fiction, but I do have a suggestion for the literary folk amongst us. If your masterpiece is running on the thin side and you'd like to increase the word count, consider finding a few contemporary literary works that are similar in structure, theme, or mood to your own work. I say contemporary literary work because we are living in the here and now and not 18th century England. Once you've found some sister novels to your work in progress, start pulling them apart, deconstruct them, and see how that author has structured the work and how they have organized the series of events. Congratulations! You now have a nifty mud map, or several, which you can use for the crafting of your own project. Please note, I am not encouraging you to plagiarize a Pulitzer Prize winning plot. This exercise is all about getting a clue for how you could possibly structure your own plot. You are not stealing other people's ideas. Now, on to genre fiction. Again, it's unlikely that all of these suggestions will be applicable to your own work, but you may find that one or several of them could help in the beefing out of your manuscript. So let's start with the first suggestion, which is subplots. A good dose of subplots is the most obvious solution to narrow novel syndrome. Hence why I'm making this the first suggestion. If your first draft tastes a little like orange concentrate, it's probably because you haven't included any subplots. And that's fine, but a story isn't really one story, it needs layers. Your cast of characters can't be striving for one goal, and they can't be juggling one single problem, because that's not really juggling, that's just holding. Basically, other shit needs to happen. Subplots are a great way to give your minor characters something to do, and this can assist in the drawing out of tension. Let's say the protagonist has been abducted by the antagonist. Rather than having him escape within a couple of pages, you can drag out the tension by including scenes where the minor characters have gone on a quest of their own, seeking the knowledge or object they need to save their friend. If you're writing crime, fantasy, or adventure, consider including a romantic subplot. And if you're writing romance, consider giving your characters a problem to fix. This will improve readability as your readers see the two characters working and strategizing together to solve a problem. And, well, look, at some point they're just going to have to put their pants on. If you want your reader to stay engaged, your characters are going to have to do something else that's interesting. Ideally, a subplot should support or complement the primary plot. It shouldn't have its own distinct narrative arc. For example, let's say the hero falls for the love interest while on their quest. It's totally okay to include some lighter scenes and some smooches, but it can't be all sunshine and rainbows. By falling in love, your once loner character now has something to lose, and you need to take advantage of that. Which leads me to my next suggestion, which is add more obstacles and make your protagonist's life a living hell. If your story is coming up short, maybe you just haven't included enough obstacles. A character arc should be comprised of multiple obstacles that challenge the character physically, mentally, and emotionally. It is the overcoming of these obstacles that your character grows and develops. It also makes their successes that much sweeter, because there ain't no sugar in easy victories. The protagonist needs to climb mountains, slay dragons, and defeat giants before he can have a break and munch on a Kit Kat. Next up, you need to explain key concepts and plot points. If you're an underwriter, chances are you've plowed through that first draft at lightning speed, dedicating mere sentences to the explaining of key concepts and plot points. How did the detective know the protagonist was abducted? How did they know they were taken to a Fleabag hotel? Why does your hero even like the love interest? Do they have anything in common, besides being total babes? Read through your manuscript or enlist the help of beta readers, and search for those scenes where additional explanation is needed. Fast pace is good for tension, but there's nothing good about gaping plot holes, shallow characters, or confused readers. Next up, we have additional points of view. If you're writing a first-person narrative, this isn't going to be relevant to you, but if you're using close third person or omniscient, then welcome to the party. Even if you're using close third person, you can still tell the narrative through multiple characters. When I initially wrote my novel, it was all from one character's perspective. Then I realized that the novel would be so much more interesting and complex if I included another viewpoint. Now the novel is split 60-40 with alternate viewpoint chapters. Now, if you're using an omniscient viewpoint, then this step is so much easier. Consider reading through each scene slowly and looking for opportunities to thread in interesting observations, opinions, or reflections from your extensive cast. Show, don't tell. I'm not going to describe the difference between showing and telling, because you're a badass writer and you probably already have this tattooed on your forearm. However, if you suspect that this may be an issue for you, then consider printing out your manuscript and highlight all instances of telling. Obviously, there are times when telling is better than showing, but if your highlighter has run dry at the end of this activity, then we got a problem, and you got some rewriting to do. Next up is setting the scene. If you were super focused on getting the story out during that first draft, chances are you skimped on the setting. You don't need to include establishing shots at the start of every scene or chapter, but your reader does need to know where your characters are and how this scene fits into the timeline. You can do this by including short phrases like later that day or a few hours later. If you're writing a fantasy novel and the story takes place in an alternative world, then you need to describe that world. But for the love of Tolkien, do not spend 20 pages describing gardens and buildings or religious beliefs and political systems. If you haven't already heard, our attention spans are shortening, and no one likes an info dump. The learning curve within a fantasy novel is steep, but if you thread relevant information organically and in bite-sized chunks, you're much more likely to keep your reader engaged. Now, description is also important even in contemporary settings, but because the narrative is set in this world, you don't need to describe everything in detail. If you're one of those writers who hates description, you can use this to your full advantage by setting your scenes in super ordinary, mundane, or familiar locations. For example, you could have a scene set on a plane. You don't need to describe the pale grey trays, the rows of seats, or the tiny, tiny bathrooms. We've all been on planes, we know what they look like. You don't need to describe the location in detail, but you do need to situate the reader in the scene by telling them that the character is on a plane. Now on to hooky first sentences and nail-biting cliffhangers. This step may not add that many words, but if you apply this strategy to every chapter, it will have an accumulative effect. Plus, it improves narrative tension. As I've already mentioned, our attention spans are shortening, and with so many entertainment options at our disposal, our job as writers is to do everything we can to keep the reader's attention. By starting each chapter with a great hook and finishing it with a nail-biting cliffhanger, you are building some killer narrative drive that's going to keep the reader buckled to their seat. Next up, we got sensory detail. This is probably the biggest tip. The best way to pull your reader into a story is to ground them in the character's body using sensory descriptions. Sight is the easiest sensory description, and you're probably including plenty of this anyway through descriptions, so I'm not going to unpack this one. Instead, I'm going to focus on other sensory details such as sound, taste, touch, and smell. Dean Wesley Smith says he rotates through all 5 senses every 5 pages, so that's 1 sensory description every page. Zero in on the feeling of different textures, gravelly roads, silky jackets, a warm mug of coffee. Include sounds from the surrounding environment, traffic, nature, music, silence, even the ringing of ears. Now, taste can be a harder one to pull off if your character isn't eating or drinking, but you can do it. If your character is in a fight scene, they could get punched and have the metallic taste of blood in their mouth. If the hero is making out with the love interest, you could describe the taste of tobacco or beer. Your hero's pretty kick-ass like that. Another thing to consider is the inclusion of secondary level action. You can increase your word count by inserting elements of a subplot into a scene that is focused on the central narrative. Imagine the hero is about to enter an epic battle, and the love interest decides that right now is the best time to reveal a massive secret. Remember how we bonded over being orphans? Turns out we're actually siblings. I mean, what are the chances? Not only will this increase your word count, but it will elevate tension, the scene will become more complex, and it will raise a whole host of other questions. Alternatively, you can add second level action through the environment. The dialogue may be engaging, but imagine how interesting it would be if you shifted it from the safe environment of a library to the wild environment of a motorcycle rally. Your characters can be dodging bikes and feeling the burn of unwelcome stares as they hunt down the gnarly dude who sells nifty maps of the underworld. If all else fails, maybe you just need to work on your characters. Do your characters feel real? Do they have depth? Are they complex? Does the reader have a real sense of who they are? Do you? If you haven't taken the time to construct some character profiles, consider doing that right now. If you need a little guidance on how to build a character profile, I've got a link in the description below. Once you start including character details like mannerisms and relevant internal expositions, your word count will start to increase real quick. There you have it. Those are my 10 suggestions for fattening up your manuscript. Now go forth and start shoveling spoonfuls of delicious and nutritionally dense words into your skinny manuscript's gullet. That was kinda gross. Sorry. If you liked this video, please hit the subscribe button or leave a comment, and you can always find out more about me and my opinions over at my website. Happy writing, guys, and I'll see you next week.